Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back to my channel, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer, with you guys again today. Okay, so today I've decided to speak about what I would consider to be fundamental basics when it comes to interpreting a birth chart. And the main points that I will be discussing about reading a birth chart is the importance, the absolute importance of really understanding where the soul is at. And what I mean by that is this. When you are assessing a birth chart, first of all, you could be using any number of different techniques, any number of different house systems, any number different of principles. And what you will discover along your journey of practicing astrology is that some methods, some house systems, some principles work for some people and for others they don't. Now, why is that? My understanding is that the reason for that really pertains to the culture of the person, their background, the country they were born into, the nationality, the socioeconomic status, their education, all these components of an individual's experience really need to be looked at and understood and taken into consideration when you're actually looking at a birth chart. So, for example, if I'm looking at a blind chart, so when I say a blind chart, what I mean is this: somebody gives me a chart and says, read that for me. If I don't know whether the person is male or female, if I don't know where they come from, as in which country and culture they've been born into, then there's going to be a lot of gaps in my ability to actually delineate how this chart is reflecting this soul's journey. This is an important point to understand. So, for example, if I'm reading, on the other hand, knowing some information about an individual, if I'm reading a birth chart from an individual that was born in India, for a start, in India they use a very different system to the tropical system, which is the one that I use here where I am. So Vedic astrology, for example, seems to work very, very well for those born in India, born into that culture. If I'm to apply that system to myself here in Australia, where I've pretty much grown up, that system just simply does not work for me. Now, I know there's going to be some of you watching this that will have, may want to debate this or have strong views. That's fine. You can share your comments and your questions. I don't have an issue with that. I'm just simply sharing my journey, my understanding and my experience, and I'm hopefully wanting to give you guys some things to consider when you are actually looking at charts as well. But putting aside the different systems and the different zodiacs and so on and so forth, whether it's a sidereal or whether it's a tropical, that's really not the point of the discussion today. The point that I really wanted to make is this: that anytime you are assessing a birth chart, you really need to be taking into account these fundamental principles relating to the soul's journey. That is, where were they born? What culture are they born into? Is there a religious, take to their life in terms of what they were born into? What's their educational background? What's the socioeconomical background? These things have great influence. So, for example, Coco is saying, hi, everybody. Coco is my cat, for those of you that don't know. For a person who was born in India, for example, even the aspects in their birth chart will potentially play out very differently to what they will play out for a Western woman in a Western country, simply because of the implications culturally. And one example that I can use would be that, in India, arranged marriages have been the case for a very, very long time as part of their culture, and it still pretty much is in a lot of India. Yes, there are modern sort of pockets in India where some families don't necessarily follow that tradition, but that's far and few in between. So the majority still follow that kind of cultural upbringing, understanding, and so forth. So certain aspects in a woman's chart in India might describe the fact that she's going to get married. There's Coco. That she's going to get married, at a certain age. And there's a way of predicting that as well. I have a lot of clients who approach me from India, and the first thing they ask me is, when will I get married? Will I get this job? Will I earn this much money by this age? See, the system in India is very much about prediction, and it's very much about everything is so fated. That's the consciousness, that's the culture, that's how they've operated for eons. Now, in a Western country such as Australia or America, the majority of people don't necessarily live with that kind of perception. The majority of people like to feel and understand and think that they make their own choices, and they decide for themselves which way their life will go and when they will get married and what they will do, etc. That's basically because of the culture that we live in. That's the culture we've been brought up with. That's the understanding and the teachings that have come through either the generation we were born into, or the family we were born into, or the country we were born into. So that's one thing to really consider very, very closely when you are assessing a person's birth chart. You must always take into account these primary components of where this soul is from, what they were born into, because being born into India, or being born into America, or being born into Greece or Australia, all has different implications. Different sort of experiences that the soul is seeking to evolve through. And that takes me to my next point, which is I incorporate, as I've said before, many different sort of branches of astrology. Now, even in esoteric astrology, which is an area of astrology that I consider very strongly when I'm looking at a person's birth chart, which the fundamental principle is about the soul and personality. And the underlying message with that is the struggle for a human being throughout their life is perhaps the disconnection that occurs between the personality and the soul. And it is that the challenge is to bring those two together and to align the personality and the soul. That usually happens in the second part of life for people, as I've said before. Now, in evolutionary astrology, which is the teachings of Jeffrey Wolf Green, which I also consider in my work, the other thing that we need to be taking into account is what stage of evolution is the soul at any point in life when you are looking at a person's chart. So there are 4 stages essentially, but there are 3 primary ones. I'll tell you what they each are. So the first one is called the dimly evolved state. And according to Jeffrey, there's only 3 to 4% of souls in what he has observed as being in this state. And that actually pertains to, I'll just read you what it says, either souls that are evolving into human consciousness from other forms of life such as animals and plants, or souls that are de-evolving backwards into the condition due to karmic causes. Now, as I said, that's only 3 to 4%, so that's a very, very small portion of souls that belong to what's called the dimly evolved state. The next one, which is a primary state, is called the consensus state. Now, each of the states that I'm naming, they have these subdivisions as well. So the consensus state is where the majority of people, or the majority of souls, belong to the consensus state. And if you look around at the world, it's pretty obvious, because that's pretty much defined by the external world, and the drives and motivations and ambitions to succeed on that external level. It's very much egocentric, ego-centered, and so forth. Not making any judgments, just making clear definitions. But in the consensus state, there is a first, second, and third consensus state as well. And they are called the beginning, the established, and the culminating sub-periods. That is the case for the remainder of the evolutionary state. So the first one, as I said, is the consensus. Well, the first one is the dimly evolved state, which is a very small portion. The second one, or you could even say the first one really, is the consensus, which is where the majority, maybe 80% or more of souls, are still in that consensus state. The second is the individuated state, pertaining to the term that Carl Jung coined, which is a much more conscious and aware state. It is, in short, it is the soul that is seeking to decondition all the old structures pertaining to beliefs, behaviors, perceptions, and so forth, that not only connect to the current life, but connect to many, many lifetimes that the person had previously. And the individuated state also has 3 substates, again, 1, 2, and 3, and each of them having a beginning, established, and a culminating. And the third and final one is the spiritual state of evolution, which is, again, a very small portion of souls would belong to that state. That is the souls that have pretty much disconnected or disengaged from that external world altogether. It is the Christ and the Buddha and the Krishnas and lots of other souls that had that kind of consciousness and awareness. Now, I just want to read a couple of things to you. To accurately determine the evolutionary stage for any soul, one has to understand the totality of that soul's reality. To isolate upon one dynamic, as in a desire to be seen, will not of itself be an indicator as to what the evolutionary stage is for the soul. It is orientation to reality. It is essential to know what any soul's inner orientation to external reality is, what the bottom line within them is about as a core orientation to reality, to really know what the evolutionary stage is. So, in order to make this assessment about a person, if you're reading their chart, or even if you're just reading your own chart, nobody knows you better than you. That's a given. But if you are working with charts, if you are working with astrology and you're wanting to incorporate this system of understanding, that is that souls are evolving at different stages in their life, which I feel that this is very, very true, then you need to spend some time with the person, not just their chart, but the actual individual. And by having some sort of engagement, by asking them a few questions about, their understanding of their reality, what does that mean to them? The answers to those sorts of questions will certainly point you to possibly identifying, which evolutionary state they are in at this point in their incarnation. And that is very, very crucial because that's going to help you understand how the cosmic energies of their birth chart reflects their experience in their current life. What drives them, what motivates them, how they are experiencing these energies. So, you know, these are very, very important points to take into account when you're actually looking at your own chart or anybody's chart for that matter. There's just something else I wanted to read. So the evolutionary stage is the evolutionary stage of the soul, not of the personality. Without seeing the nature of the soul, you have no way to know the cause of the external phenomena you observe. That's a very powerful statement and a very powerful point to really consider and reflect upon. Because at the end of the day, whilst we are here in this human form, we are a soul that's incarnated into this physical form, into this physical dimension. And our soul, for each of us, is evolving at different levels and seeking to experience different things through every incarnation. So it is important, therefore, to have some kind of connection or some kind of understanding or some kind of grasp of the soul's journey, the soul's evolution when you're actually looking at the birth chart. It adds so much depth, you know, to understanding the person themselves, the soul, why they are here in this incarnation, in the country they were born into, the soul's desires and lessons that the soul has chosen to undergo, to experience, to evolve through. These are all very important considerations and questions to ask yourself when you're actually assessing a birth chart. Coco is so playful today. So that's really all I wanted to say. It was just a very quick video. I was just having a little chat with my best friend, mentor, astrologer, who's many things to me. And we were discussing this very point earlier today, and I thought, you know, this is a really valid and valuable thing to bring to you guys, to share and to just briefly touch on, so that you can start to understand this and consider it when you're actually assessing a birth chart. Because, and just to leave you with this, you know, and I've kind of said this already at the beginning of the video, somebody who's born in Australia and therefore is born into a different culture, perhaps a different religion, some certain, you know, family background, nationality, and so forth, to somebody who's born in India or in Africa, you know, there and let's just say that these people have identical charts, which, you know, happens a lot. It is, you know, without certainty that these two people will have entirely different lives. And, you know, it cannot be any other way, because it is the uniqueness of the soul and the soul's evolutionary path that pretty much defines how this chart is going to be expressed, reflected, experienced, and lived, which is the person's life. Hi, Coco. Hey, do you want to say hello to my beautiful people who love astrology and who are watching and learning? Okay, guys, I hope that this very small little presentation is helpful for you. If you haven't really thought about these sorts of things before. Now, the book I'm reading out of, for those of you that are interested in learning evolutionary astrology, of course there are courses that are offered by different people and so forth. I'll leave that for you to investigate. But if you're the sort of person, I've studied courses in the past in astrology 25 years ago. You know, I started astrology 25 years ago, a long time ago. But I've learned a lot through the years myself, just through practice, through reading, through sharing with my mentor, as I mentioned, and so forth. However, this is the book that I would recommend if you want to start to grasp the model of evolutionary astrology and how it is applied to the birth chart. This book is gold, really. It's very valuable, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in exploring astrology from that much deeper level. Just another point, if you're sitting down with somebody and they ask you, well, when am I going to experience enlightenment? And then you speak to another person and they say to you, when am I going to be able to buy that BMW that I want? And this is not a judgment. This is just identifying where the soul is at on an evolutionary level. Clearly, those two souls are on a very different path and a very different level of evolution. But that's just a very simple example to get you thinking about how to apply these teachings, this understanding, these principles. And you don't have to study evolutionary astrology. I mean, you know, that's up to you. But just very simply take away, if anything, from this presentation, just take away the understanding that when you are reading a birth chart, take into account all the various things that I named. That's going to help you understand a lot more about the person and where they're at and what they really need and why they've even come to you for a reading. That's certainly my thinking and what I apply when I'm looking at a person's birth chart. So I just wanted to share that with you guys today, and see you guys very soon with something else. Thanks to the new subscribers that have jumped on board recently, and thank you to everybody else. Thanks for your comments and questions. Once again, they're always welcomed. I appreciate them very much. And as I said in my previous video, I've got a community section that's opened up. I'm starting to share a little bit of material on that as well, which is mainly pictures and quotes and some astrological teachings and so forth, spiritual things. Thank you to those of you who have engaged and made a few comments and so forth. Please feel free to continue to do that. I really want to develop a community there where people can just engage and share and learn from a real authentic space where there's no judgment, just an acceptance and appreciation for this beautiful wisdom that I love to share. Thanks so much, guys. See you soon.